Good evening. Welcome to Talk Gnosis. Tonight is our 100th episode, and we've now got 1,000 subscribers. And joining us tonight is Bishop Tim Mansfield as we discuss the secret book of John and contemplation. Welcome, Bishop Mansfield. How are you?
Thank you very much, Bishop Canterbury.
Welcome.
I'm good. It's good to see you. Bishop Peterson?
Great to see you, Bishop Tim.
Thank you.
It's been a while.
It has. It has.
Yeah, it has been a while. So
Your viewers get to see what it's like to talk to somebody on the other side of the world where it's the middle of the day. Sorry.
Yes, it's actually we're talking to a guest from the future. So yeah, it's
Indeed.
very special to have on our anniversary, 100th anniversary show. We've got somebody in the future, and he can maybe give us all the lottery ticket numbers
Yeah,
It's true.
at the end of the show.
The day's looking good. I think it should, as it moves towards you, I think you should, you should anticipate. It's nice, blue, it's kind of sunny. It's good.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I guess we should probably just dive right in here. And
Absolutely.
as usually, and Bishop Mansfield, the topic this evening is the Secret Book of John, which is, I believe, a Sethian text. It was in the Nag Hammadi Codex, but it had been discovered earlier in an independent excavation before. So there are some differences between the codexes that exist, but it's a pretty interesting text. Through my work with June Singer's Gnostic Book of Hours, I've become somewhat familiar with this text, and I've read it, but like many Gnostic texts, it requires a lot of contemplation. And I guess we're going to talk a bit about contemplation because you're associating this text with some spiritual practices, which we're real big on here on Talk Gnosis. So could you tell us a little bit about your work with this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right in saying, absolutely, it's in the Nag Hammadi library, and I think we had one copy of it prior to that, but it's actually in the Nag Hammadi 3 times. It's the opening text in three different folios that were in the original find. So I believe it's actually the Gnostic text which we have the most copies of. We have more copies of it than we have of Thomas, even.
Excellent.
So it gives us a couple of things. I think a lot of scholars of the Nag Hammadi library feel that because of its position, because it's placed first in the folios in which it was found, and because there are 3 copies of it, that the compilers of the library felt that this book was a particularly significant book, and that its position as first in the folios implies that it's the kind of cosmology. First you need to get this, and then you can read that other stuff, and this puts the rest of it in context in some way. Now, whether or not that's true, I think it is true that it's probably the best preserved of the texts that we've got, because we've got multiple versions of it, and we can get a sense how the thought of the book evolved over the course of its life. We get a sense of Karen King's written some fairly good stuff, which are speculations. There's no archaeological evidence for anything she says, and she owns up to that. But that it's the style of it is very much an Alexandrian style of authorship. So it probably came from a mystical school context in Alexandria, which is, as you know, right up near the mouth of the Nile, just on the shores of the Mediterranean. But the final find is near the monastery of St. Pachomius, Nag Hammadi, right down the south of the Nile. So it's reasonable to imagine that the book, over the course of its life, through possibly 1 or 2 redactions, travelled from that urban environment of Alexandria, and then sort of from monastery to monastery and community to community down the Nile, until ultimately it winds up in a desert community right down in the south, and possibly goes through some scribal translations and various adaptations as it moves down through that path. So, yeah, I think it's a very significant book for Gnostics, and I think it's something that it bears our attention to work with it and play with it and try to understand it. I mean, there's lots of great stuff, obviously, amongst the Nag Hammadi library and other Gnostic books outside that, but the prevalence of this book sort of speaks to its significance. So for myself, I'm part of the Apostolic Johannite Church, and so anything with John in the title gets my attention.
Of course.
Kind of as a sort of a twitch, So yeah, amongst all the books, amongst all the Gnostic texts we've got to hand, it's probably the one I've spent the most with over the last sort of 3-4 years, I guess. So I've read through it multiple times, and Bishop Peterson, you and I were speaking just before we were about to come on the show about the necessity of really working with a text.
Yeah.
Actually, do that again. That was
okay,
really good.
it's for me, and it's. I love to read. I always have. But it was in more or less recent years that I began to develop more of a spiritual practice. And what I began to notice is that I would read something and then I would practice. And I would come back and read the exact same text. And we're talking a period of weeks or months or even years in some cases. Read the text again. It's almost like reading a completely different text because the meaning has increased. Go back and practice some more, come back and read it, which is why I tell people when it comes to scriptures, where it comes to works of very important spiritual teachers, for me it's Gurdjieff, constantly coming back and reading it, because that's how you engage. You read, you practice, you allow it to change you, you come back changed. And you can read it again. And I think that this is in many ways the essence of studentship. Being a student is, you come to the teacher or to the text or whatever, empty, knowing your own nothingness, saying, I need to learn. You are receptive to the text. You begin to work with it. There is knowledge and wisdom that increases. You go back and you are able then to receive more. And each time you're filling yourself, you're emptying yourself. You're filling and emptying. And for me, that's just been a really marvelous thing to be able to do on this path. It's something that I'm very grateful that I was eventually able to learn. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And you said earlier that we've kind of lost the art of being a student. And I think that's really true. It's quite, because the last couple of 100 years, as thank God, literacy's got very widespread. And as we've all got access to, I was saying to someone the other day, it's only 2 decades ago, when I first started reading occult and spiritual material, people would go on, when one of my friends was going to a larger city, they'd take orders to kind of go to a big bookstore and pick books up and bring them home,
Absolutely.
The amount of stuff that you could get access to was so tiny. And now we have an embarrassment of riches. But I think we've got a reading culture that's about, cheap novels, recipe books, how-to guides, whatever it is for dummies, and not to put those books down, because they're very important for people to have access to knowledge. But it creates an expectation that if it's not literally present in the text, then the text is inaccessible and you shouldn't bother reading it.
Right.
So what you're pointing to is that wasn't the expectation in the time these books were written. The expectation in the time that these books were written, and I include, the books of the Bible in that world, is that we'd chew them. We'd eat them, we'd chew them again, we'd digest them, and we'd spend some time digesting them, and then possibly chew them again. Sorry, I'm heading to a cow metaphor and I need to back away. But you understand what I'm saying. There's a lovely video on YouTube, Father Thomas Keating, who's one of the Christian teachers that I'm very fond of, talking about Lectio Divina, the traditional practice of spiritual reading. And he talks about the literal, when we read scripture, there's the literal meaning of the text, and that's obviously an important thing to understand. And he put it really beautifully. He said, but the literal meaning of the text doesn't exhaust the possibilities of scripture. In fact, it's just the beginning. And it's only with continual work with the text that the further meanings disclose. And I think you're pointing to kind of an esoteric perspective or a mystical perspective, which ultimately I think those two terms overlap with a Gnostic perspective, that
they do.
These texts only make sense when they're illuminated by our own practice life and the experiences that we've directly had as practitioners. And also, they frame and symbolize and help explain and connect the experiences that we're having as individuals within the discourse of a community.
Yes,
and it's that
absolutely.
It's the connection of those two things together that makes what we do what it is, I think. Because if you can practice on your own and have all kinds of experiences, and that's great, but you need to have a shared language to bring those experiences into community.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, that's one of the reasons why I think Lectio Divina, being reading out loud and having different people read the same text over and over again, even the different inflections, different tones of voice, whether it's a man or a woman reading the text, it can make an accent can make such an enormous difference in our ability to receive that text. And I think that that's another very crucial aspect of this. But also within community, the notion of having a guide that it's in there that you can find teachers and guides that can help mentor you and teach you what you don't know yet. So it's all so important. to have this kind of you have community, you have practice, you have your own reading, and that's quite necessary, I think.
It's the components of a kind of, well-lived spiritual life, I think.
It is. It is. So
So,
I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about this passage. A lot of it has to do with creation. It's a very
it does.
different take on the creation story than what people who are used to reading Genesis are interested in. So I think it makes it really it's very, very different. So could you talk a little bit about that?
It's very different. In many ways, it's the kind of satirical prequel to Genesis, if you like. It kind of, okay, sure. There's that stuff that happened in Genesis 1. But let me tell you what happened before that, right?
Uh-huh.
It's interesting. I mean, a lot of Gnostic books, Reality of the Rulers and Tripartite Tractate, there's quite a lot of the books have detailed cosmological narratives at the beginning of them. But it is the primary concern of Secret John to tell this story of the formation of the world and the creation of the human being. And it tells a story that goes through multiple layers. It starts off talking about the monad, or the one, who is utterly without qualities and unable to be compared to anything else.
Right.
Which really, there's echoes there of the mystical theology of Pseudo-Dionysius, but there's also echoes of a lot of stuff that we get in lots of other traditions. There's Sufi stuff, Kabbalah stuff, Advaita Vedanta stuff from Hinduism, Kashmir Shaivism stuff that a lot of the language here resonates with a lot of the non-dual traditions in multiple places in the world. This notion of the one without another. So it's not the monad is not the highest. Right? It's not the high God above all other gods. It is that which cannot be compared to anything else because there is no second.
Right.
So it is pure singularity, pure oneness. Or to put it another way, and in a more common sense way, I think, being. The monad is being itself. And it recalls that line that Paul quotes from Epimenides in Acts, that the God in whom we live and move and have our being. Which is such a beautiful line.
Yes, it is a beautiful line.
I'm not a big fan of St. Paul, but he chooses good quotes.
I think, we'll get into that in the After Dark part of the podcast.
We'll have another chat about St. Paul at some point. So it talks quite, and the whole book in the versions we have is phrased as a dialogue between the Savior, who we imagine to be Christ, and John, who poses himself as the chief among Christ's disciples. And there's a lot of theory about that part of it is kind of added late to the text, and the core text is earlier, but that's a longer conversation. Anyway, there's this. So this early part is the Savior telling John about the nature of the monad, and kind of at some length explaining that I actually can't tell you anything about the nature of the monad, because to tell you something about the qualities of it would require me to compare it to something else, and nothing else can be compared to it. He takes several pages to say this, and it's a classic kind of articulation of a sort of apophatic stance towards divinity. And then it shifts quite subtly to using the term the Father. And there's a sense in which we're taking a different perspective on the nature of the one. So in the first place, we're talking about the one as it is in itself, and then we start talking about the Father, which is the nature of the one as it unfolds into qualities, in a sense, within it. And this is the process of emanation. That's one of those core things in Gnostic texts. The thing that's remarkable about Secret John is, I think when you read it closely, there's a tendency, I think, to take what we might know from medieval Kabbalah, and when we read Gnostic texts, sort of imagine that what we're reading is the same kind of narrative that we're reading in medieval Kabbalah. And so the process of emanation is often thought as there's a high God, and there's these layers of reality that unfold down from the high God. But I think a close reading of Secret John is telling us there's the one, and then if we look at the one kind of on the inside, we see that there's this process of unfolding that happens within the one.
Okay.
So first the first father, and then the first father seeks to know himself, and the seeking to know himself, the self-observation faculty of the father, comes forth from the luminous light water that surrounds him. And she is the primal mother-father, she is the first human, and she is called Barbelo. There's these beautiful ecstatic passages that really resonate.
Gorgeous language.
Gorgeous stuff. It's really beautiful. And so there's this interplay. So now there are two. Within the undifferentiated oneness of the monad, there are two. There's the first father and there's Barbelo. And then these other divine qualities unfold in perfect harmony out of that original pair. and then ultimately there's the pentad of the realm of the Father, and then it unfolds into the Son, the autogenes, the self-created, who then has four great luminaries, four great lights that surround him and attend to him, and then they have divine qualities that unfold below them, and I won't list them because there's a long list. And then ultimately we get to the point of our favorite heroine, Sophia, who is one of the attendants of the luminaries that surround the autogenes. And then Sophia decides to create out of harmony with the rest of the system. And this is the controversial bit. And in two different versions of the book, the way that this is phrased quite differently. In some of the later versions, she's an idiot and she does this dumb thing. In the early versions, it just says this is what she did. It doesn't place any judgments on it.
Okay.
And we're left to speculate, why did Sophia go about doing it this way? I like to think that there's all this harmony that's happening, and at some point God's wisdom decides, well, what balances harmony? Disharmony, and sets about creating something that is different from what had existed up until then. Mm-hmm. She creates the demiurge, the creator, and denies him and hides him, and then the demiurge goes on to create ranks of rulers.
Yeah.
And then we get into the whole creation of humanity. The human being is created in the image of Barbelo, really, but in the image of the first human that's shown to the rulers from the realm above. And it's a bad image. They do a kind of a shoddy job of it, but still it's in the image of the first human. Mm-hmm. And then they create the human being's soul and soul body out of their own natures. In amongst this, the aeons of the higher realm notice all this going on through a complex process and descend into the world of the archons and infuse into this emerging human being the nature of the first Father himself. So the highest spirit of God is infused into this human being. And then the human being is cast into the realm of matter, and then the story of Genesis begins. So we're told this story. It's remarkable. We're not going to get to contemplation, I think.
We will on the podcast.
Absolutely.
We'll do this later. So the thing that's remarkable about this is that it's telling us that we are originally flawed. In our original creation, we're this sort of misshapen. We have these misshapen souls created by these abandoned, dominating presences cast out of the higher realm of the divine. And in the center of that, our spiritual nature that's in the core of it is of the purest essence of the first Father, the origin of creation itself. So we are originally perfect and we are originally flawed simultaneously. So the journey of the Gnostic in the version of the Secret Book of John is to come to know this complexity which is within us, and to sort of unfold back through these stages in which we were created, to return ultimately to our original nature, which is in the bosom of the Father, I think. And that, I think, is what contemplation is about. But that's a longer conversation, which I think we've run out of time for.
Yeah, but this has been a marvelous story, I think. Absolutely wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us. What do you have to say, Bishop Canterbury?
I've enjoyed listening to this, and I was having a bunch of visuals that I think we're going to be discussing in the podcast. I'm visualizing all these geometric, patterns of going on from the monad. But I think, we definitely need to continue this heavy discussion in our podcast. I would encourage our viewers. Do you meditate? Do you have any practices? What are your particular thoughts in this text? We would like to hear your opinions on the Secret John, either on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. So please, give us your feedback on this. Also, if you've enjoyed our show, if you found it helpful, please, support this program by going to our patreon.com/Gnostic page. Pledge any small amount per video. You can cap a limit for your videos and your podcasts. It directly supports this program and the development of future programs. This is our 100th episode. We want to thank all of our listeners and all of our viewers for your support. We are up to 1,000 subscribers now, so thank you all very much. And we look forward to giving you many more years of continual service and doing great shows like this and having wonderful guests like Bishop Mansfield on. And we appreciate you joining us for our 100th episode.
It's a privilege. Thank you.
And it's also been a real privilege to work with Father Tony Sylvia, who conceived this show 100 episodes ago and has kept it going through some good times and some bad times. So thank you very much, Father Tony, and I hope our viewers will thank Father Tony in the comments as well for his service. And as Bishop Kennery noted, we do have the Patreon campaign for you to help support the show. Right now, we're going to be moving on to our recording of our After Dark podcast, which is an hour-long audio podcast where we discuss these topics more in depth. And that will be available within 5 to 7 days at talkgnosis.gnosticnyc.com, also on iTunes or Stitcher. However, if you're a Patreon supporter, you can actually watch us tape the show live. So you basically get a sneak preview, and you can have some fun watching us kick back while recording an audio show. It's kind of fun. So and you can also ask questions during the show that we try to get to as well. So again, I want to thank everybody so much for joining us this evening, and we always appreciate your feedback. Please leave comments on YouTube or on our Facebook page. You can also send us an email at talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. So again, thank you so much for joining us, Bishop Mansfield, and on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for watching the show tonight. Take care.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
This has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. For more information about this and all of the Gnostic NYC Network's programming, visit GnosticNYC.com. The opinions expressed in this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Gnostic NYC or any other organization. This show has been released under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 International License.